Pushing that is hard work, and I've only come a couple of 100 metres. Imagine what it'd be like pushing it all the way from Perth, 600 kilometres. Amazing. Back in the early 1890s, thousands of men were doing just that, pushing barrows, riding bikes or buggies, or just tramping on foot. They were all heading in the same direction, and they were all after the same thing. I'll tell you what, pushing that for 600 kilometres, you'd need to find something. And really, they did. They found the richest square mile of real estate in the whole world. In a few short years, in the 1890s, gold strikes at Coolgardie and Kalgoorlie changed West Australia from being Australia's most backward state. And today, with a new gold boom, this track has become a treasure trail again. Why don't you come with me as I follow the trails of our early prospectors into Australia's Golden West? What is it about gold? It's not the rarest or the heaviest metal. It's not even the most valuable. But no other metal fascinates us like gold. Aha! Every gold rush in the world seems to have started the same way, with people picking up handfuls of nuggets like this. And Australia was no exception. Fortunes were made in our first golden towns of Ballarat, Bendigo, Bathurst. From these places, treasure hunters set out on an amazing overland trek across New South Wales, across Queensland and into the Northern Territory. By then, the gold rush had lasted 30 years and had literally changed the face of Australia. But it still hadn't got to the west. But in 1886, it did. In our first centenary year of 1888, the gold trail reached the town of Southern Cross. This was an amazing trail, over 10,000 kilometres long, and there was some people that followed it all the way on foot. And really, another interesting thing is the shape of it. It was like a giant arc, a golden rainbow if you like. Now, they had found the pot of gold at the start of the rainbow. The question was, were they going to find the pot of gold at Rainbow's End? 4 years after gold was discovered in Southern Cross, the town was still the end of the line. But more and more expeditions were moving out into the wilderness beyond. Some seemed to travel light. Bikes were a good way to get around. They never got thirsty. Beyond Southern Cross lay dangerous country. Dangerous because it was very easy to get lost and perish. Even when it rains, most of the water just vanishes into the sand. One of the first lessons prospectors learned when they started exploring this country was that water was far more precious than gold and often much harder to find. And when they came upon a rocky outcrop like this, it was very welcome because they knew it could lead to a very important discovery. In this country, a human being needs 5 litres of water a day. A horse needs 20 times that much. So you can see the value of riding a bike or even walking. This is what I'm looking for. Now, I want to show you this. This is very important. Now, the Aborigines called this a namma hole. I call it a rock hole. Now, because it's on hard ground, a little bit of rain comes down, runs into this. Invariably, they've always got water in. Now, they were very important to the Aborigines, but they was equally as important to the prospectors that first came onto these fields. Now, I want to show you something, how the prospectors tested this water to see if it was any good. By dipping your fingers in, you take the water in small amounts. Now, that was important, because if you tore in here and got a cupful and there was anything wrong with it, it could make you very sick. Now, the lack of water in the goldfields really hindered the search for gold. So it's no wonder that the first gold strike was made near one of these nammer holes at a place called Coolgardie. The first mine was Bailey's Reward. Bailey and his partner Ford were on their way to Southern Cross. They had 200 kilometres to go when they camped near here in August 1892. Now this mine may not look much, but in fact this was the first of the genuine golden holes. In the first year, they mined $15 million worth of gold in today's currency, and they were taking gold out of this mine right up to the 1960s. Imagine the impact back in Southern Cross when hungry prospectors saw samples like these on display at the local bank. Bailey's Reward was the beacon that brought men flocking into the wilderness. Most men were coming with high hopes and empty pockets, and they had no idea how tough the field would be. By the end of 1893, the population of Coolgardie was a staggering 15,000. It was on its way to becoming Western Australia's biggest town. By 1899, it was able to open a Coolgardie World Exhibition with over 61,000 people attending. By the 1960s, Coolgardie was a ghost town. All that remained were the relics of those golden times. Now, Coolgardie is a tourist town. The attractions are the refuse of that bygone era. Today, the Goldfields is attracting another type of prospector, a fossicker. Now, he's not looking for gold, but he's looking for the things that the early prospectors discarded. They're rubbish, if you like. Take, for example, this bottle. Today, this bottle is worth more in most cases than the money they got for their gold. They come in all shapes and sizes and every colour of the rainbow. This priceless collection can only be seen at the Coolgardie Museum. The working conditions on the goldfields were appalling. Water was scarce, the dust choking. Half the town had gold fever. The other half had typhoid fever. Bad food, bad water. They say half the town buried the other half. Of the first 60 victims, no one knew the names of 30 of them. All these goldfield settlements were very harsh places to live, and really very tough places to live because there were some tough characters here. And all of these places had a mining warden. And here at Coolgardie, they had probably one of the most famous, a chap by the name of Finnerty. And of course, he had to be very tough to maintain law and order. And actually, this is Finnerty's house here, which overlooks Coolgardie. It's nearly 80 years since Finnerty lived in this house, but to Francis Tree, it just seems like yesterday. The house today is run by the National Trust of Western Australia, and she and her husband are the resident caretakers.
When Finity first came to Coolgardie, he lived in tents with his family down at the Namaholes. He lived there for 2.5 years until this house was built. And he lived here from 1895 to 1911 when Mrs. Finity died. And once she died, he just simply packed up his family and he walked out of the house and just left it. So, of course, the house became empty and derelict and was to be pulled down in 1925 for the Oregon timber in its roof. But a lady here had 12 children. She always wanted this house, so she bought it for £150, which was the price of the Oregon timber. When they came here, there was nothing here. The train didn't come till 96 and the house was built in 95. So the only thing that came up via the camels was your corrugated iron, your glass or your door locks. But the bricks and everything else, the wood, the timber was brought in from Esperance in log form and hewn up here into planks for the house. So everything was built locally. There was no town here, no buildings or anything. Finity's was about the first house built up here.
Interesting old house. And the man Finity must have been a very, very interesting person. Let me tell you a story about him, how fair he was. Here, before they had jails, often they used to put men in a tent. And the only thing that kept them there was their word. And this particular day, Finity had to go away on some business. And he had 4 men in a tent. And it was one of those real hot days. And they got very thirsty. And they got the bright idea that if they pulled the pegs out the tent and walked the tent down to the hotel, their mates would look after them. Now this they did, and they kept carting out beer to them all day. Well, you imagine what they'd been like. And then they thought, they've got to get back before Finity comes home, so they get the tent back there. And when Finity comes, he goes over to the tent, has a look. The 4 are in there, but they're as drunk as monkeys. And he said to them, "You've broke your word." And they said, "No, Mr. Finity, we never left this tent." And when he heard the story, he never done anything about it. He just realised that he had been outsmarted. They had not left the tent. I didn't think it'd ever get to this, but really it did for a lot of the early prospectors. Now, before they had lockups, this is how they used to chain them up. But as barbaric as it seems, it was done for their own good, simply because most of them were drunks, and they did not want them to be roaming around the field and falling down holes and getting hurt. So this was the safety precaution. In its heyday, Coolgardie had 20 hotels. I wonder, with that many hotels, how many prison trees they needed. Today, there's only 1 hotel, and it's your best chance to catch up with the local prospectors. In the old days, if you asked for a whiskey in a Coolgardie pub, the barman would probably hand you the bottle. But if you said you wanted water with it, he'd reach under the counter, bring it up and measure it out very carefully, because water was more precious than gold and even whiskey. Anyway, I'm going to have a beer. The talk amongst prospectors hasn't changed for nearly 100 years. Gold strikes. But invariably, it's someone else's. Ray, these 2 old people, you know, say got the 1,700 pieces of gold, roughly how much or what weight would they've got? What, 3 ounces, 5 ounces?
Oh, no, more than that, mate. No,
well, what do you reckon? Tell me.
About 27, 28 ounces.
Hell? Yeah. That must have given them a hell of a lift.
They hadn't done any good. They hadn't done any good at all, the poor old buggers. And been there 3 or 4 weeks. And I said, "Oh, well," I said, "How'd you go?" And they said, "Oh, no, we still haven't done any good." I said, "Well, come out with me tomorrow." I said, "Go over there." And I said, "It's a good little patch." I said, "You could crack something there. It's all right." And the old bloke and his missus, they were about 65, you know. And the old bloke walked up the top of the creek over the easy way, and the old lady walked over the hard way. And as soon as she got there, she started a detector. And she come back to me, she was 25 minutes. She come back to the dry blow and she said to me, "Ray," she said, what percentage do we got to give to you if we've got gold in your pocket?" I said, you give me no percentage, just tell me where you found it. And she had an apron on, and she pulled out 10.5 ounces. That's a good one.
Back in 1893, these streets were paved with gold. The stories and rumours of newer and bigger finds spread like wildfire. Some of them led to fabulous fortunes, while others had disastrous results. The secret of finding gold is always keep looking. But look, I want to tell you one of these fabulous stories of the Goldfields. It concerned 6 chaps. They pooled their money, bought mining equipment, and away they went. And after 6 weeks of finding nothing, they started having arguments, and to finish up, it blew up, and they said, well, you go your way to 3 of them, and the other 3 went the other way. And 3 of these chaps, as they were coming in towards town from the bush, they were still napping along, just having a look. And then one of them sat down to have a little bit of a cool off or a drink, and he casually looked down to where his foot was brushing against a rock. And here was gold. Jumps up and starts pecking it, and there's gold everywhere. It's flying off everywhere. And he said to his mates, his 2 mates straight away, quick, go and get the other 3. Now, I don't know where he'd done this. I would have told him to keep going. But he called them back, and they mined this place for 6 weeks. Fabulous. Lumps of quartz coming out with gold all over it. And finally, the news got out. They'd kept it secret, but it got out. And when they flocked to the field, all the miners, a very important person was with them, a Lord Fingal from England. And soon as he seen these fabulous specimens, he must buy the mine. And he paid $400,000 for it. And then tore back to England with some of these specimens, raised all the money he could get to start a big company to mine this fabulous mine. But when he came back and started mining, there was nothing in the hole. Really, what they had sold him was an empty hole. This caused an international scandal. News of it even pushed the trial of Oscar Wilde off the front page of the London Times. It didn't do much for confidence in the Goldfields either. But suddenly, that didn't matter, because at last they did find a golden hole, and it just kept going. It was just over the hill, east of Coolgardie. In the year 1893, 3 prospectors were on their way to a new gold rush, and their names were Shea, Flanagan and Paddy Hannon, and they camped roughly here. And when they got up in the morning and they started looking around, they picked up something like 130 ounces of gold nuggets. Now, that is $84,000 in today's prices. Now, Paddy Hannon was sent very quickly back to Coolgardie to register the claim. Now, why Paddy was sent back, he was the only one of the 3 that could read or write. And within a couple of days, something like 2,000 miners had flocked here, and it was known as the Paddy Hannon Find. But today, of course, it's not. We know it as Kalgoorlie. Nearly 100 years on, Kalgoorlie is still a gold rush town. The gold has never run out. Even today, no one really knows how deep the gold may go. By 1900, Hannon Street was already one of the busiest streets in Australia. It's really funny when you think of it. 3 men found the gold, and yet Paddy Hannon is the only one really that got the fame out of it. And I suppose it's the same with Kalgoorlie, because Kalgoorlie has always had the magic name, but in reality, Boulder has the gold. The golden year was 1903. Trams and trains linked the twin cities. The population was 30,000. This was indeed the pot of gold, a patch of ground 2 miles long and a half a mile wide, the Golden Mile. Head frames bristled like porcupines. Underground, there were endless miles of tunnels. By the end of 1903, they had mined over 5 million ounces. In today's value, that's $3 billion worth of gold. They had only been mining 10 years, but they knew by then that they were on top of the richest square mile in the world. Poor old Paddy Hannon. He'd led the rush to the pot of gold, but all that he got out of it was some very lean pickings. He did win fame, of course. Today, his statue has the pride of place in Hannon Street. I suppose you could take this two ways. On one hand, Paddy might be telling us that water is still more precious than gold.
Or he might have been saying that you could spend your whole lifetime on the Goldfields and be left with nothing more to show for it than a drink of water.
The Cassidy Shaft opens into one of the few big mines that are not on the Golden Mile. They mine the deep Mount Charlotte ore body, not far from where Paddy Hannon first found gold. It's only when you see a model that you can get some idea of the scale of this mine. Those tall head frames on the surface are really just the tip of the iceberg. Down below is where the action is. The red area is the ore body, and what surrounds it is an intricate network of tunnels down to a depth of nearly 1.5 kilometres.
Now, this is the biggest mine in the whole Kalgoorlie area. But just a few years ago, in 1977, it looked like closing. At that stage, it was the only mine working. In fact, it was that serious that the Premier of Western Australia, Sir Charles Court, gave them something like $500,000 to keep going because he didn't want to have all these people out of work. And luckily, things then started to pick up. And today, we're right in the middle of another gold rush.
In the early days, they mined rich reefs and pockets of gold. But around these areas, they left billions of tons of rock, which we call halos. And that's what they mine today, mostly by open cut.
The slime dumps of Kalgoorlie, the rubbish dumps if you like, they are the evidence of almost 100 years of mining. And one man's rubbish is another man's gold. And it's true here, because with today's new extraction methods and the price of gold, they estimate that in those dumps, they can recover something like $450 million worth of gold. Now, all they need to do is to get 1 gram, just 1 gram, for each tonne of ore, and they'll be laughing.
Aren't these slime dumps amazing? Just think, all this is man-made, brought to the surface by the bucketful, crushed, most of the gold extracted, and then the rest put aside as rubbish. While looking at these mountains, I can't help thinking how big a hole there must be below. Of course, it's not like that. It's really like a giant ant's nest.
Thank you. I hope I'm going to win on there. I'm trying to strike my pot of gold the easy way. And really, when I think of it, I've probably got more chance of striking this than a lot of the prospectors did have of striking their pot of gold when they came here. But there were some prospectors who struck it very rich.
The Bobby Dazzler, the Little Hero, the Map of England, and of course the Golden Eagle. All these are replicas of the fabulous nuggets that have been found on the Western Australian goldfields. Now, these nuggets are rare. They are so special, and they are the things that cause the gold rushes. There's nothing fires the imagination more than a great whopping lump of gold to be found. But it's sad, because I cannot show you the originals. When these nuggets were found, it was illegal to own gold. It had to go to the mint, and they melted it down, which to me is one of our greatest crimes. Take an example, the Golden Eagle. When that was found by a 16-year-old lad in 1930, he was paid something like $20,000 for it. In today's terms, would be something like $700,000. But if that piece was put up, say, on the world market at Christie's for the museums of the world to bid for, 5 million, 10 million, you name it. And for that not to have been kept is one of our great crimes, I believe.
Kalgoorlie likes you to know that it isn't a tourist town, it's a gold town. If tourist attractions have to make way for new mines, then so be it. Mining dominates. However, amongst all this activity, there is a lot of history, and some of it can be found right here in this hotel.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Very good. Good beer. This is a very interesting hotel. It's called the Boulder Block Hotel. In fact, it's the only remaining one left here. At one time, on 1 acre of land here, there were 6 hotels. There was 4 shops, breweries, post office. And this place was a town within a town. And it was a very rough place. Everything went on here. In fact, it was called the Dirty Acre. I find that very interesting. But look, there's something I'd like to show you before I leave here. Very interesting.
This is one of those fabulous stories of the Goldfields. Now, I'm down in the cellar of this hotel, which is situated above the Perseverance mine tunnels. All the tunnels under here where they mine the gold. Now, the miners a few years ago got the bright idea that they would tunnel through and bust into this cellar. Then, when it suited them, they could come up and have a beer. But there was another side to it. They also used to smuggle gold out of here. Now, this was kept secret for many, many years. In fact, people say that this was the richest hole on the whole field.
The Goldfields have attracted some odd characters over the years, and Ron Tremaine is no exception. Who could have imagined Marion's Castle out in the middle of the Western Australian Goldfields? But here it is, and it's home for Ron. With a house like this, you might think he's a bit of an eccentric, and really he is. But he's also one of the dying breed of independent prospectors who are battling to find new claims that haven't already been pegged out by the big mining companies.
We've gone down 25 to 30 feet deep, and then we break into the old tunnels. We're broken into the old tunnels now, quite big tunnels, and we're getting then 6 grams to the tonne. Before we turn the tide, it'll be about next June, and then we start turning the tide, and then we're beginning to get well off, but we've earned it. So if we make $1 million after that, we've really earned it. I don't mind making $1 million and become younger, get off the pension at 70, it'd do me nicely.
Ron, do you have any new extensions planned for the castle?
Oh yes, there'll be a church going up in a chapel going up in the front, and all that carry on. We'll be living here still, you see.
The music of the Goldfields is the sound of a battery in full flight. This is where the independent prospector brings his load of ore for crushing and gold extraction. In the old days, you could hear a goldfield before you saw it. Imagine when there were 90 mines on the Golden Mile, all running batteries like this. But like the prospector, their days are numbered. There are more efficient ways of getting gold out of rock. To me, however, this is still the pulse of the Goldfields. When these old batteries stop, I don't think the place will be quite the same. There are 2 essential ingredients to run a goldfield, to make it work. The first is fuel, to run the boilers and their generators and make the machinery work. And the second is water. Now, the story of how they obtained these 2 ingredients at the Goldfields is a very interesting one. Firstly, let me tell you the fuel story, which in this case is timber.
Most people find this quite surprising because the country is semi-desert. Ian Keeley works for the Department of Conservation and Land Management of Western Australia. He is a conservationist, and he is one of the few people I've met here whose feelings for this country has nothing to do with gold.
This is fairly typical Goldfields woodland, eucalypt woodland, not unlike what original settlers in this area would have discovered. It's unique woodland, unique in the world and in Australia. Nowhere else do we get this standard of woodland in such a low rainfall zone. It played a very, very important part in the development of the Goldfields because the woodlands provided all the fuel that powered the Golden Mile. As the woodland got cut over close to Kalgoorlie, a couple of companies started up railing the timber in from further out, and they developed a massive network of small tramways. Fairly massive volumes of timber came in on some of the wood lines, of which the longest was about 120 miles. The wood line started at about the turn of the century. The last wood line closed down in 1965. When you think of an industry that was cutting, say, 500,000 tonnes a year, is a lot of timber. And we estimate that something like about 30 million tonnes of firewood was cut and carted into Kalgoorlie. Nature did a very good job in regenerating that country. Generally what we've got now around Kalgoorlie, certainly within 100 miles of Kalgoorlie, is a good regrowth eucalypt woodland, much denser with much smaller stature trees.
There's another kind of prospecting that's been going on in this country well before the days of gold. Sandalwood pulling. And Bill Savage, with his prize truck, is a true pioneer. He's over 80 years of age. And his truck, well, who knows? But they're both still going strong. This wood has a natural perfume. In Asia, it's prized for incense and for carving. In the early 1800s, there was a worldwide sandalwood rush, like a gold rush, and all the known supplies were used up. New sources had to be found. Western Australia's supply turned out to be one of the very few in the world. In the 1840s, sandalwood was Western Australia's biggest export, and it is still important. Bill Savage has been pulling sandalwood for 42 years. It's a hermit's life for old Bill. And Ian Keeley is a regular caller when he's making his rounds.
Hey, Bill. Good weather? Great weather for ducks. The old truck's just about had it now, Bill.
Yeah, still going.
Going all right? Good.
It's getting a bit tired on it.
Yeah, we should be. Getting plenty of wood? Getting plenty of wood? Is all the wood this good?
Good wood, yeah. Fair quality. Takes a long time to grow, it doesn't take long to die.
No.
Bill is an interesting old guy, and for his truck, I think it will keep going as long as Bill does. Isn't it amazing when you look around this countryside and think of how much timber was used to power the early goldfields? And yet today, it has survived and grown back to its natural state. The other necessary ingredient for the survival of the goldfields was water. And this water was brought to Kalgoorlie by that brilliant engineer, Charles O'Connor. Supplying the water to Kalgoorlie was one of our greatest engineering achievements. It is also one of our saddest stories. The story starts 600 kilometres west of Kalgoorlie, here at Mundaring Dam, near Perth. This is in well-watered hilly country they call the escarpment. The question was, how to get the water the 600 kilometres to the goldfields, especially when the path was nearly all uphill. O'Connor's solution was revolutionary. From this dam, using a series of giant pumps, he would force the water along a pipeline, stage by stage. The first of those original pumps is still preserved here at Mundaring. There was only one problem. Nothing like it had ever been done in the world before. The practical difficulties were immense. But the biggest problem wasn't the project, it was the knockers. From the start, O'Connor was attacked and ridiculed. It had never been done, so they said it couldn't be done. These personal attacks took a dreadful toll on Charles O'Connor. But it was done. In 1903, the first water flowed through to Kalgoorlie. It was a great occasion, but tragically, O'Connor wasn't there to see it. In a fit of despair because of the knockers, he had taken his own life just a few weeks before. Today, O'Connor's pipeline is still vital to the Goldfields. It brings fresh water to Kalgoorlie and a score of other places along the way. The pipes are newer and bigger, but the water still flows because of the vision of this man O'Connor. For hundreds of kilometres surrounding Kalgoorlie, you can see the shattered dreams of prospectors, the remains of golden towns. What Paddy Hannon had stumbled across was an immense goldfield. But unlike Kalgoorlie, a lot of these surrounding finds didn't last. Mines came and went, and along with them, towns with populations of thousands. Teams of 400 camels hauled cement 200 kilometres across the Mulga to build the Niagara Dam to serve a town that no longer exists.
It's hard to imagine that this was home for 12,000 people.
This is Australia's most spectacular example of a vanished town. It is called Kanowna, and it's no more than 20 kilometres from Kalgoorlie. In 1905, this town had a population of 12,000 people. This was no tent town. It had brick and stone buildings and two-storey pubs. In fact, it had 16 pubs. It had chemist shops, churches, cafes, tennis club, and even a Tivoli theatre. Trains for Kalgoorlie left once every hour. There was no great disaster here, just the gold ran out. Unlike most of these goldfields, Kanowna had surface gold, so the town became a haven for small prospectors.
And this, believe it or not, is where a lot of those fortunes were made, in the local cemetery.
This was all part of the original cemetery, but after it was laid out, they found a rich alluvial lead ran right through it. After a great deal of agitation, they were allowed to mine it, and they found a lot of gold. In fact, on 1/4 acre block, that's a house block, they took out 35,000 ounces of gold.
Could you imagine them trying to convince the warden to let them mine in the cemetery? And just say, for instance, Murphy the Irishman talking to the warden and saying, "But warden, look, I knew Wilson very well. He was a man after my own heart, and I know he wouldn't mind." And then, here, in the dead of night, 1,000 men lined up all around the fence, waiting for the warden's gun to tear in, falling over headstones and bushes and everything in the middle of the night. And as they were digging, I'll bet they were looking over their shoulders. It was towns with deep mines that survived. Sons of Gwalia was one of the best. A young American engineer first made his mark here and went on to become one of our best mining engineers. And an American president. His name was Herbert Hoover. But this isn't ghost country anymore. It's all open-cut mining. And the old tunnels are being exposed by these gigantic holes in the ground. All through this country, new companies are taking over the old mines to work their golden halos.
A new generation is living rough on the goldfields. Well, maybe not so rough as they did in the past. But it's still hot, hard work. But for these old towns, it's a new lease of life. One man who is part of this new gold rush is Robert Money. And with a name like that, you'd think some of it would rub off. And it has. He's your modern day prospector. With all the comforts of an air-conditioned four-wheel drive, his sophisticated instruments and his strong geological background, he still needed a bit of luck to find his gold. And it came by the way of a dead tree.
Yes, this is the famous tree that gave us the clue that we needed for the breakthrough. It had blown over, and as you can see around you, it's featureless, it's soil covered, there's not a rock within cooey, and you wouldn't know what was underground. But in the root system of this tree, before it was burnt off, you could have seen it, there was quite a good hunk of quartz, which we dollied straight away, and lo and behold, colours, gold in the dish. Having determined there was gold in the system from the fallen tree, we grabbed pick and shovels and, with a lot of enthusiasm, hopped in and dug this reasonably primitive costine, but it was good enough to prove to us that quartz existed. We possibly got gold in about 80 or 90% of the samples. That was sufficient proof to us that perhaps we should peg another tenement to the north. And this is what we did, and it was the last tenement out of about 22 that we pegged in all, and that happens to be where the gold resource is today, which will be hopefully developed in the near future. That's what you call ringing the dish.
These samples often lead to an open cut like this. Here at Paddington, 50 kilometres north of Kalgoorlie, is a modern-day lucky strike. In 1982, while drilling below an old mine shaft, they discovered a huge new gold reserve, as Randall Ford explains.
Well, to give you an idea of what we're doing, in the pit behind me, we've been operating here for roughly 12 months now. In that time, we've removed 3.8 million tonnes of material, and from that 3.8 million tonnes, we've recovered 1.5 tonnes of gold.
Randall is a modern-day miner. He works for Pan Continental in one of the most sophisticated processing plants in the world.
It's cheaper to open cut than what it is to go underground, mainly because it's less labour intensive. Because we can use large equipment and we can move a large amount of material, the unit cost for each unit of material that we shift out as an open cut is a lot cheaper than going underground for the equivalent amount of material. Back at the turn of the century, the miners used to use a physical process to recover the gold. What we're doing now is more of a chemical process that enables us to recover almost 95% of the gold that's in the ore. As a consequence of this, we can now mine a much higher tonnage at a much lower grade to get the same amount of gold.
And here at the end of the processing plant is the magical pour. And no matter how modern the technique, the end product is still the same. For thousands of years, this scene has fascinated mankind, and Randall Ford is no exception.
There, 4 bars of gold. Not bad for a week's work, eh? Looks all right too.
The gold trail has an end, and it's here at the Mint in Perth. It might be a few grams from a prospector or ingots from Paddington. It all goes into the same melting pot. The little hero, the golden eagle, the hand of faith, the welcome stranger, nuggets that sparked off gold rushes.
Today, they're sparking off a new rush. These nuggets have become the world's most sought-after coins. Mind you, back in Kalgoorlie, some people have better things to do with a couple of coins. This is one of Kalgoorlie's really historic places, a shed in the bush, a game called Two Up. I'm going to have a bash. This game runs every day except miners' payday. It closes at sundown and is one of Kalgoorlie's top tourist attractions. The game is as old as Australia itself. In the early days, there were schools like this all over the Goldfields. It's a straight-out 50-50 bet. You either win or you lose. That really wasn't too hard. And when I think of it, gambling and gold has always gone together. And you could think of a miner doing a week of back-breaking work and then come into here and just on the spin of a coin, risk the lot. Maybe he had to keep proving to himself that his luck hadn't run out. It's amazing when you think of it. Since the 1890s, they've taken over $20 billion in gold out of those mines, and it's still coming. In fact, this year, they will mine more gold than they did in their boom year of 1903. The thing that people find hardest to believe is that this is really the end of the Golden Trail. You'd think with all the modern equipment and all the people that are looking, there must be at least one more pot of gold out there somewhere. As long as people keep thinking there's a pot of gold out there, they're going to keep looking. Now, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a look. And should I find anything, I'll show it to you next time. See you then.